Welcome everyone to At Our Table Substack Live. I'm Jamie Harrison, your host, and today we are talking about one of the most fascinating uh, political battlegrounds in the country, the state of Florida. Florida was once considered the ultimate swing state, but it has moved sharply to the right in recent years. Republicans now hold every statewide office and large majorities in the legislature, but politics, my friends, is never static. And Democrats in Florida are trying to rebuild from the ground up. Joining me today is my good friend, Nikki Fried, the chair of the Florida Democratic Party. Nikki previously served as Florida's Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services from 2018 to 2023, and she is the last Democrat to win statewide office in Florida. But she is the person that is putting together the recipe to break that trend and to make sure that we get Democrats elected up and down the ballot in Florida. Madam Chair, welcome to At Our Table. Glad that you could join us today on Substack Live.
I am so excited to be here, Jamie. I mean, you've been seeing a front row seat to what we've been doing here in Florida, and certainly your leadership and guidance over my first 2 years as chair certainly helped us get into some of those win columns, and your true support when you were DNC chair really created an opportunity for us to be doing that building. So I appreciate this opportunity to come on to your Substack. I was a little upset that I wasn't at the LA trip and couldn't see you in person, and you spoke to a lot of my DNC members. So I'm glad that I had this opportunity today to talk to you.
Well, and you know what? I can't wait to come and visit again in Florida. I told folks, in 2024, I think I visited Florida just as much as I visited any other battleground state, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And that is because I believe in the long term investment in that state. And, I mentioned earlier that it's a state where Republicans now hold every statewide office, but things don't always stay that way. So when you look at this political map, what does rebuilding Florida actually mean to you, and how long does that rebuilding effort take?
When I got into this position, and as you know, I was not intending to be in this position when I got when I got out of office in 2023, and had run for governor and lost my primary and had been, out. This is not where I was planning on going. In fact, I think you told me not to do this. Uh, but I'm a glutton for punishment. And so, I said, listen, I couldn't sit back. I love this state. I was born and raised here. My parents were born and raised here. My family still lives here. My friends, I went to the University of Florida. I'm a triple Gator. So my heart bleeds orange and blue, SEC football. And so I knew that if I was ever going to have an opportunity to move our state back into balance, and I say balance a lot because I think that if you say we're just going to flip the state blue, that you lose credibility because knowing how hard and how much work this needs to get done. But it's a bottom up approach. It is so often we keep hearing, and it's not just Florida, but it's across the country. You all aren't showing up until 2 weeks before the election. Where are you? What are your policies? What are your issues? And we have a branding issue. And so we knew that we had to come in and start all over and start kind of moving the pendulum when it comes to even the branding, like the new logo, red, white, and blue. Our logo was pastel blue. And so we looked at it in a very different perspective, of how to rebrand the state, how to rebrand the party. And that's realistically what we started to do is really kind of lean in on some of that. But then it's starting to build the bench. It's recruiting candidates. It is making sure that we're going from the bottom up. And so often here in our state and across the country, you spend time focusing on the golden goose eggs at the top of the tickets, the U.S. Senate races, the governor's races, and you don't build the community and the bench on the bottom up approach. And so we came in and we redid all of our vote local programming and trying to recruit candidates and rebuilding trust. I think that is a lot of it of why we've come to where we are today, is that we've lost a lot of trust with our voters, that for so many years that we've been just naysaying what is happening and not producing solutions to the everyday problems. So it is about rebuilding trust. It is changing of the brand. It is showing up year round consistently. It is recruiting candidates that are reflective of the communities in which they're coming in. And it's regaining the trust of not just our voters, but the people outside of Florida, because we can't do this alone. We need to have our partners across the country, our donors, our electeds, the DNC, see a lot of our sister organizations. But you can't do that if you haven't done the work first. And so, God helps those that help themselves. And we understood that assignment. And that's the kind of work that we're putting into it. It's every day, it's getting through the hard days, as I've also say consistently, those hard days, which are basically every day. And my previous chairs who have done a fantastic job. But the reality is that most of them here in Florida only stay 2 years because you've lost an election
Yeah.
and, you get kicked out, your state committee, everybody kind of pushes out and blames the state party chair for what's happened at the election levels. And so what's happened is every 2 years we have a new chair. And I consistently have said, it's like a Fortune 500 company that if you
Mhm.
had every 2 years your board of governors and your CEO and C suite are replaced, your company's eventually going to go bankrupt. And that's
That's
kind of what was
exactly right.
happening here. And so it's about building the program, the consistency of the program, consistently showing up. Um, and it's working.
Well, infrastructure and consistency are so key and important. And you're right. In many ways, we have to look at the party building effort like a business, like you're building a business from ground up. And I can tell you, you all are putting in the work because we're starting to see some dividends from that work. Your pendulum organizing program recently reportedly flipped 17 seats in
Yeah.
municipal elections, and Democrats in Florida's 2025 special elections overperformed the national average by about 5 points. So how do you and I have to say, Eileen Higgins, the new mayor of Miami, first registered Democrat to hold that seat in decades. How much does a win like that actually move the needle politically versus being more of a feel good moment? And how do you, if the big mo is on your side, momentum, how do you bottle up that momentum and scale it to congressional and statewide and other local races?
Yeah, the 17-seat flip last year is huge. And what was incredible about the flips, it was in all parts of the state. It wasn't like it was just blue areas or purple areas. We were flipping seats in red areas. We're overperforming the first congressional special elections last year in 25, CD1 and CD6, overperformed 18 and 22 points movement to the left from just the November 24 elections. And so when you saw at the end of the year, it was kind of everything kind of bubbled up from where we started in 2025 and ending the year with the Eileen Higgins City of Miami election. And what we were able to show is not just that the momentum of that kind of win, but really being able to analyze how that happened.
Mm.
That it wasn't just a fluke, that it was everything came together at once. You had an incredible candidate who understood the city of Miami, understood Miami-Dade County. We're talking about the issues that were impactful to Miami. She wasn't focusing on Tallahassee. She wasn't focusing on Washington, D.C. She was focusing on the issues that she was hearing on the doors when she was going to the churches and the synagogues and the mosques. She was hearing those issues, and that's what she was responding to. And so you had a great candidate. And then we have a completely rebuilt Miami-Dade local party chapter with an incredible new chair who has been doing our pendulum project, year-round organizing, getting boots on the ground, doing the phone banking, the door knocking, community engagement. So we had an organized Democratic Party, both in the state level and the local level. And then you had the resources. And so everything kind of has to come together. And what was remarkable about Eileen's race is that, yes, everything did come together at the perfect moment. But what I was able to then take from that selfishly is go to the rest of the country and say, look, proof of concept. You have now seen me here for 3 years, pounding the pavement, talking about our wins. This is the 17th win of this year. We're overperforming the national average. This isn't just a fluke. The fact that this is the first time in 30 years that a Democrat was able to win this election with Trump and DeSantis and every Republican coming in to help the Miami Republican in that race, and still we moved the needle 20 points. That isn't just a fluke. That is the hard work, the culmination of everything that we've been doing at that moment. And it really gave us a spark. I mean, I was on call time the next day and calling through and bringing those dollars in and showing, look, there's something to invest in. We're not just putting money on TV. We're not just talking about like investing in Florida. We're talking about true infrastructure building that is sustaining in these wins.
And that's really big. It's important for folks to know, like, you gotta look at the big picture. You gotta pan out a little bit. A few years ago, Jacksonville, like, you knocked that off the block for the Democratic Party. Now Miami. And so you're chipping away at this Republican control of the state, and it takes more energy, it takes more effort, it takes more resources, it takes more volunteers, and that's why people cannot give up on Florida. And Nikki, there's something the reason why I'm a big believer in both Florida and Texas and why they are so important is particularly because of the Latino communities in those particular states because it is not just about the Latino communities that live there, but the cultural influence that they have on Latino communities across the country. When you think about media, Hispanic media, it is coming from and it is influenced by two places, Florida and Texas. And so, folks living in New York, folks living in Michigan, living in other states are getting they're hearing from their relatives in Florida. They're hearing from they're watching media or listening to media there. The WhatsApps are originating from there, and that's why it's so key and important that you all have the resources to help push back on the message and build a frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that, I talk a lot about. One, I'm a Miami girl through and through. I was going to Cayo Ocho when I was like 7 years old. My back neighbors were Cuban, had come over in 1967. So it was exposed very early on in my life to the culture and intertwining of those cultures in Florida. And what's unique about Florida, and even more so than Texas and other parts of the country, is the fact that we have such a diverse Hispanic community that we have, of course, our Puerto Rican community that has expanded after Hurricane Maria, where we had about 1.5 million Puerto Ricans that moved into the state of Florida. And so that is and they are American citizens. And so it's a very different conversation to what is happening on the island. And so some of the direct connections between issues that are happening on the island and how that impacts people in the actual state of Florida. And then the intertwining of obviously the Cuban community. And again, it's on generational. When did you get here? How did you get here? And it is the Colombian community and Venezuelan and Dominican. And so it is really such a large, diverse, and every community is different. Why they left their countries, whether it was, the onset of socialism and communism, seeing what was happening in Colombia with FARC, obviously the Castros in Cuba. And so in order for people to understand what is happening in Florida, you have to see how the intertwining between those communities are and where their homelands are. And seeing what's happened in Venezuela, they're demanding democracy. They're not demanding oil, they're demanding democracy. And so understanding those nuances is really, really essential, and having the resources to communicate in the native tongues and going on to those social media outlets. And unfortunately, the Republicans have done a really good job of painting us as those extremes from those countries that they left. And it's not enough to just say, I'm not a socialist. I mean, my first commercial in 2021 when I first announced was Yo soy capitalista, making sure that people understood, who we are as Democrats, what we fight for, how we fight for it, and trying to dismantle the rhetoric and the labeling of what Democrats are. And it's in order to do that, you have to understand it. You can't, again, just go into a room and say you're wrong. You have to say, listen, I understood that you left your homeland because you saw your family's business being taken over, and you saw the long lines for water and to food. I would never let something like that happen to you here in our country. And understanding and empathizing with some of some of the reasons why people left. And I think that the other problem, Jamie, and just be honest and candid, is that because the rest of the nation doesn't understand as much about the Latin American and Central American culture of our states, that it is very easy for the Democrats across the rest of the nation to say things that are maybe not politically advantageous to building a coalition in Florida, which then puts us even into a harder, trying to be like Florida Democrats get it, and
Yes,
trying to
yeah.
somehow separate some of the national conversations to what we actually deal with here in Florida.
Well, and I saw that in a few situations over the course of my time at the DNC that sometimes there would be situations in Florida, national Democrats would talk about it in one way, but folks in Florida were like, "No, no, no, you got to understand that this onion has a lot of layers, and and it's important to understand that." and you can't just group people all together and think that this one blanket approach is the best approach because it's not.
That's
Um,
right. I saw it even, during the uprisings in Cuba in 2021, where, the White House had one position and was doing one thing, and yet I am having to protest with the mayor of Hialeah. So I'm sitting and protesting and with them about freeing Cuba. So there is a different dynamic here in our state, and having to make sure that we're protecting the people of our state. And sometimes that means that we're not going to be on the same page with some of our national leaders.
yeah. You've also said, Nikki, that voter suppression is the biggest structural obstacle to Democratic gains in Florida. So, for people outside the state, what does that actually look like in practice, and what can Democrats realistically do about that to stop those suppressive efforts?
Yeah, it's been going on for even before DeSantis. It really started in going after our citizens' initiatives, making it much more difficult to get things onto
Mhm.
the ballot. Putting restrictions on who could fund them, how much they can fund them, and the thresholds of it being 60% in order for one of those citizens' initiatives to get up and over the finish line, and so making it much more difficult. And as you said in the top of the show, is that we are in a super minority in both chambers, which means that the issues that a vast majority of Floridians agree with, whether that's legalization of cannabis, access to reproductive health care, Medicaid expansion, the list goes on and on and on. We can't get passed through the legislature because of the extreme gerrymandering that's been happening in our legislative seats. So, citizens' initiatives was one of those that every single cycle, when we get closer or get something actually passed, like restoration of civil rights or $15 minimum wage, that all of these things pass by overwhelming numbers, 60, 70%, yet we can't get a bill even in their first committee in the legislature. Then you add all of the changes to the actual laws that they have killed our vote by mail, meaning that every 2 years, everybody has to re enlist and get back onto the vote by mail ballots, which means more time. It's more financial resources on the party, at making sure people understand, they know. And so that is obviously one other big constraint. And then you've got DeSantis created an election police where he intentionally did five Black people right before an election that were returning citizens from the ballot initiative that was passed in 2018 to make a point. And so now you have a lot of fear factors that are associated with it. And as we are speaking today, that the Senate is poised to pass what we're calling the Voter Purge Act, which is the SAVE Act that everybody hears about at the national level. Well, it's coming to Florida first. And then you go on to the fact that they've changed how you have defined an active and an inactive voter. And so since 2022, when that law passed, every supervisor of elections has to do list maintenance with a new set of criteria that has kicked about 1.5 million Democrats
Mhm.
off of the rolls to inactive. And again, now that's more expensive for the party to now communicate with those inactives, make sure they're still here, make sure they're still alive, make sure that there is ways for them to get back onto the active rolls. But again, that hurts us on the national message because now you see such a strong difference between Democrat and Republican voter registration. And then they've changed how voter registration works. They have made it much more difficult for third parties to come in and actually do voter registration. They've increased the fines and the penalties, and the rules around how actually getting those petitions signed, making it much more expensive. It's almost $9 a return on investment on a card. And if you think about a 1.5 million voter registration deficit, that's a lot of money. And so it is something that we are constantly working through, but every single election cycle, they're doing more and more changing of drop boxes, lessening the amount of time for early voting, scaring at the polls, turning people away. I mean, there's just a lot of chaos. And what's ironic about it all is that both DeSantis and every Republican in the state of Florida for decades now have said that Florida has the most secure elections in the country. And yet every single cycle, they're coming in and making more changes, making it more difficult, more confusing for the electorate to have access to the ballot box. And those are just the ones that I'm coming up with in the top of my
Yeah.
head. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's another 10 or 15 more out there, but every single time, and of course this year too, we saw with the citizens petitions, we had another opportunity to have legalization on our ballot this year, and both the Secretary of State, who's appointed by DeSantis, who's been known to be a QAnon, and our appointed Attorney General went through as we're getting closer to the signature gatherings, they put additional rules and regulations into the supervisor elections of validating the signatures, kicked a whole lot of the signatures off because of rule changes that the Secretary of State did literally at the last minute. And so at this point, unfortunately, that's not getting onto the ballot. Again, more voter suppression. There was 1.5 million Floridians that signed that petition, and now all those voices are silenced.
Well, I hope the good people in Florida, and I'd say across the country, can see the attempts to disenfranchise voters in your state and again across the country. And you just have to sit back and ask the question, why? And the answer is very simple. They understand that the only way that they can stay in power is to diminish the voices and the votes of the American people, because I don't believe that the American people are on their side as it relates to many of the major issues that people are being confronted with each and every day. So it's a really sad testament, but I am so happy that you are there and leading the effort to fight back and push back against that. And hopefully you're getting support from not not saying DNC specifically, but national Democrats across the board.
Yeah,
Folks, again, the Republicans are using Florida as a laboratory to cook up the some of the most heinous suppression efforts, and then they're exporting those efforts to the national stage.
yeah. I mean, Jimmy, you heard me for 2 years talking about that we were the lab rats of Project 2025. All of the things that you're seeing happening at the national level started here. The banning of books, the going after our Department of Education, going after DEI in both our schools, both in K through 12 and higher education. And they just passed a bill yesterday that is on its way to the governor's office for signature that goes after DEI at our city and county levels, not being able to do any type of programming at the local level. And all of that started here. And the list goes on. The vote by mail situation, voter suppression, it just all started here in Florida in so many respects. The Don't Say Gay bill and the anti wokeness and all of the nonsense that DeSantis has done to the state for the last 8 years started here. Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 authors took Ron DeSantis and wrapped their arms right around him
Mm.
and said, "Sir, you're going to be president of the United States. Just do these things." And he said, "Okay, let's get rid of abortion access. Let's get rid of educational access. Let's get rid of Black history. Let's do all of these things." And that was the roadmap that unfortunately we are seeing play out at the national level now.
So, Nikki, I mean, I know you've said previously that for Democrats to win in Florida, we're going to have to build this coalition that includes independents and some disaffected Republicans, particularly to win on the statewide level. You have a gubernatorial race and a U.S. Senate race in 2026, which are really big, and you have some great candidates that are running, that are getting out there. But how do we approach these independents and disaffected Republicans? Because some of them may like some of this Republican policy that is being cooked up. How do you make the case against those policies and appeal to those voters um, that they should take a look at the Democratic Party?
I think we're doing it in multiple fronts. Last year I was on what we call the front porch swing, where went to red and rural areas, not with my FTP logo on or any branding, but just to have conversation. And went to a lot of farms, went to some ranches, some oyster farmers, and just tried to having conversation. And to see what is on their minds. And this is also this, and what the remarkable thing was, I talked to Democrats, I talked to Republicans, I talked to independents. And what was remarkable is that everybody said the same thing. It was a consistent drumbeat, especially on my agricultural side of things.
Mhm.
People were very concerned about the tariffs. They were very concerned about the immigration policies that were impacting their costs and their labor forces. And again, and across the board, everybody was talking about property insurance and the overall cost of living in our state. And that's what I'm hearing, not just from my own tours around the state, but I'm hearing it from my candidates. I'm hearing it from electeds. I'm hearing it from our grassroots organizations that are going to Republican doors, that are going to independent doors, and are asking the very point in question, what's on your mind? And I think that that's where we're trying to train our candidates, because I've walked with this, and as you have too, a lot of candidates and have been at those doors. And you can tell the difference between when you're just trying to check the box and say, look, I hit 15,000 doors this weekend with my team, or you're actually trying to engage. And I think that there's a very big difference when you're at the doors and you say, hi, I'm so and so, I want to be your elected representative. And you give them your flyer and you talk all about yourself. And you see the voter just kind of standing there with like deer in headlights of like, why is this person ruining my dinner or coming to me on a weekend? And I just came back from church. Like, why are you at my door? And a different reaction when, hi, I'm so and so running for whatever. I'm here to ask you what's on your mind. And you find that there's conversation at that point. And so here in the state of Florida, we are finding that there is commonality in all things. And of course, if you are the top 1% and you just bought your new mansion in Miami Beach or your new mansion in Palm Beach County, these things are not going to be at top of mind for you. But the reality is that here in the state of Florida, our economy is so lopsided. The top three economic drivers for our state is construction, is agriculture, and is tourism. And a vast majority of the people that are involved in those three sectors live below the poverty line. And so we've got to make sure that we have an economy that works for everybody. If you're 35 and under in the state of Florida, I'd even venture to say 40 and under, the thought of purchasing a house is not even on your radar because it is impossible for you to have saved enough money. You've been, throwing out all this money for rent and your utilities bills that you continue to see going up through the roof. And now you're thinking about starting a family. You certainly aren't going to have the financial means to put a down payment on a house with now the interest rates. And so we have this opportunity here in our state to not only be listening. I'm talking about the 30 years of one party control of the state that has created an education system that pays our teachers bottom of the barrel. Our economy is lopsided. People can't afford their property insurance. They can't afford their rent. They can't afford the utilities bills. Our education system has been completely liquidated into the charter school and voucher school programs. And so there's just so much stuff to talk about. Our seniors can't retire here because they can't afford to stay here. And so finding those common grounds is a lot easier these days than people may otherwise have thought because of the extremism on both sides, on some of the things that people feel like they can't talk to the others. But the reality is that most people are kind of human beings and decent and just talk to people. And I think that is going a long way with a lot of our candidates here in our state.
Nikki, the one thing I love about you is that you are a chair that doesn't just speak about the issues, but you also take action. And I remember when you were arrested protesting the 6-week abortion ban outside of the Florida Capitol. How do you balance being an activist, someone passionate about your values, with being a party chair who has who has to build these big tent coalitions?
It's one of the hardest challenges, to be honest, because I want to be out there and at every protest and be this activist and want other people to be it too. Because I think in this moment, Jamie, I'm not, and I know I'm not the only one. And I think it's everybody has had this dilemma since Trump became president again, is that on one hand, people wanted to see our fight. They wanted to see Democrats fighting. They wanted to see that we were out there, that we were, energized about taking on the nonsense and the chaos and the corruption coming out of DC. But from the party's perspective, we have work to do. I can't spend 4 hours on a Saturday at a protest. I've got to make sure that I'm doing the phone calling to make sure I can fund our program, be strategizing, and our the party system has to be getting voter registration, getting the vote by mail, recruiting, and doing the actual work on the ground. And so it is a balancing act, making sure. And what we always say too, I go to Palm Beach County and everybody's like, yeah, we're going to go protest at a Tesla dealership. I was like, fantastic. That sounds great. How many people are going? And they're like, oh, we had about 300, 400 people. I said, fantastic. How many people are actually registered in Palm Beach County? And if you could have spent those 3 or 4 hours talking to probably more voters than standing on a corner outside of a Tesla dealership. So it's trying to have that balance, but also figuring out where our lane is. Because I can protest all day long, I can be an activist all day long, but at the end of the day, that's not going to necessarily get a voter to the poll. And so it's a matter of the structural creation inside the party apparatus and working with our sister organizations that are in the state. It is okay that the party doesn't have to do everything. There's a lot of people out there that are on the grassroots side of things that are, leading the charges out on the protests and the activism, on getting people to be calling your senators and your members of Congress. So it's gonna in this moment take all of us, and we have seen probably in the and you probably can talk more about this than I can, but that over the decades, there has been tension between our grassroots organizers and that are outside the party and the actual party. That there's lanes that have to, this is my lane and this is your lane, and my volunteer or your volunteer. And I think that at this moment, no one's standing on ceremony. No one is worrying about who's getting credit or who's not, of who's in charge. We're just all working together. And I think that there's a value to us talking and making sure everybody knows each other's responsibilities, and that the party can't do it all. That is just not possible.
Hearing you say that just reminds me of a quick story that Congressman Clyburn often tells about his days as a young activist. When he was in college, he was protesting, trying to desegregate either some building or some event, and they were protesting. And so there were a bunch of them out there. The plan was that they're going to protest, they would all get arrested, and then this pastor was going to bail them out so they can get back out. And he said they all, they executed the plan. They all went out. They protested. They got arrested. While he was in jail, one of the guys who was protesting for the first time came up to him and said, "Clyburn, now when are we going to get out?" And Clyburn said, "Oh, don't worry. We're going to get out soon. Pastor so and so is going to get us out." Few hours later, the guy comes back to Clyburn. "Clyburn, now when is he coming again?" And Clyburn said, "Don't worry, he's good for it. He's done this before. He's good for it." And then the guy came back another hour or so, and he said, "Clyburn, now you said that it was Pastor who?" And Clyburn said the name, and then he said, And that's the funny little guy with the goatee and the glasses." And Clyburn said, "Yeah." He said, "Man, he's
You're
over
next
there."
to me.
He he he's over there in the next cell.
That's right.
And Clara said, the funny thing about that was he learned that day a lesson that we all have a role to play. And it is important that we play that particular role. There's sometimes some of us meant to protest and some of us meant to bail them out, but sometimes we need to be clear about what our role is in that particular situation.
No, absolutely. As I had not intended, that was not the intention of the day to get myself arrested. That was not the intent. But certainly we had at the time our minority leader who was also arrested with me. And so her legislative affairs director was kind of in charge of that as I'm taking off my jewelry, as I'm seeing the SWAT team coming down. And so I knew that she had it, and my significant other had called me as I was about to sit down. He's like, "Babe, where are we going for dinner?" And I said, "Well, you may need to meet me at the county jail. I'll see you there, babe." But it was, yeah. So everybody had a role to play. He knew that he was going to meet me at the county jail, and the legislative assistant for the minority leader was going to make sure that our attorneys were right there. But yes, we all have a role.
Now, Nikki, as we approach 2026, and in every election, I think about my own election when I ran against Lindsay in 2020. And I know you ran for governor in 2022 and you lost in the primary to Charlie Crist, who then lost to Ron DeSantis. But looking back now, do you ever feel yourself thinking, what if?
What if I had won the
Yes.
primary, or that? Yeah, every day, uh,
Yeah.
every day, because 19-point loss in November of 2022, which is what Charlie and unfortunately Val Demings, who was running for the U.S. Senate race, lost. And I know our state is not 19 points. And so, to know that we were going to be all the things that we've been talking about, all of the obstacles that we already had in place, all the things that Florida Democrats were going to have to overcome regardless. 19-point loss was devastating. Was the amount of down ballot races we lost, from city and county commission races to school board races to legislative races. There was just such a tremendous impact. So yeah, I do think a lot about, whether or not, if I had been our candidate. I'm a different type of campaigner
Mhm.
than Charlie is, and have a different type of energy that I bring to the conversation. Having been 4 years in the Florida cabinet, seeing up close and personal all of the disastrous policies that came out of the DeSantis administration, have been on the record for a whole bunch of them. That I brought a different fight and flair to the conversation. Whether or not I would have beaten DeSantis, only those above us
Yeah.
will know that answer. But certainly I don't believe it would have been a 19-point loss.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, you bring a different type of fight and a different type of energy, and I'm glad you are in the role that you're in now, because I really do believe that your focus and your energy, your discipline, is really going to take the Florida Democratic Party out of the wilderness, and I believe that for a long time, and I've seen it. It's little by little you are chipping away at it, and I think we're gonna get there, and my hope is we get there in 2026. So thinking about that, looking ahead to 2026, which is right now, what's the one race in Florida that Democrats absolutely you feel like have to win to show the party is rebuilding, if there is just one?
No, if there's just one. And
Yeah.
and be and I say that because my congressional candidates are dynamic. And I think
Mhm.
it also talking about other voter suppression. I mean, as most people are also knowing that we may get through have a redistricting here in the state of Florida. It's at only March 11th, and so the diabolicalness of the Republican Party of Florida are going to try to redistrict our maps, which is harder in Florida because we do have a fair districts amendment that they can't do it on partisan lines. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But regardless of what they do with the maps, I am very bullish on our candidates. We have incredible candidates, a lot of first responders, of veterans. I mean, I probably have 10 plus, 15 plus veterans who are running for congressional seats all over the state. And so I do think that because of the energy from the chaos of DC and watching what is happening with Congress right now, that a lot of the energy is coming to the congressionals. And so we do have some really important races that we're focusing on. I mean, God, we've got everything here. I mean, we've got Marco Rubio and Pam Bondi and Susie Wiles and Randy Fine and Corey Mills and Salazar. I mean, literally that, like, they kind of like pulled everything that is um I want to make sure I use my words correctly. The pit of the Republicans are all here in the state of Florida. And so I think that we're going to see some congressional flips, regardless of what they do with the maps, or we hold the line. So I do see, between all those seats, an opportunity. And I think for us, it's taking back Miami-Dade.
Yeah.
Miami-Dade County, we've got some really important congressional races there. We've got a lot of really important House and Senate races, state House and state Senate races, down ballot school board races. So I do think that, like, our focus is making sure that the nation will wake up and say, okay, Florida's not gone.
Yes.
They were able to take back Miami-Dade County in a real way. And I think, of course, the Hispanic community and what's happened, not just on the immigration stuff. I think that that's really where a lot of the misnomer is. That people want to go talk to our Hispanic community or any minority community and talk about immigration. And the reality is that I've had more roundtables and conversations with all of our diaspora communities, and the things that we care about is the same. It is making sure that they have safety in their communities, making sure that their kids can go to a good school, that they can get good paying jobs, that they can, take a trip once a year, to Disney World or somewhere else. And I think that Miami-Dade is going to be one of those tests, that the work that we've been doing on the ground, the messaging that we've been able to have, and making sure that we are trying to put the Miami-Dade back in the W column.
Nikki, there's this debate inside the Democratic Party, particularly on the national level, about strategy. Some argue that Democrats should confront Trump and the MAGA and the GOP head on, while others say that the party should stay focused on the bread and butter issues like costs and housing and schools. Where do you land in terms of that discussion and debate?
You know, I'm kind of a little bit in the second bucket. I think that you would have to be living under literally a rock to not see the chaos that's coming out of Washington D.C. That it's it's not little things here and there. It is just so abundant. Whether it is what happened with Doge and what's happening with USA Aid and what's happening with the tariffs and it's the Epstein files and it's the fact that his family is literally stealing dollars from the American people. It is the complete grift. It is the private planes that are being purchased for Nome. It is just it's all of it. But I don't and I think that it is important for us as Democrats to obviously like have responses, but people see it. They're not blind because it is just so abundant. And voters that I talk to in the state of Florida, they know it. They know the corruption. They know what's happening. They know he's trying to nationalize the elections. They still don't have a clear plan on what's happening in Iran. They're confused. They're seeing, oil prices going up at the gas pump. They're seeing all of this. But it's gonna be us that are gonna have to show up with solutions. People don't wanna just hear us complaining. They wanna know that we've got their back, and that means that we're making their lives better. That as and what I get to do here in Florida is now I've got a lot of great mayors between, again, Jacksonville, Donna Deegan, all the way down to Miami-Dade County with both the county mayor, Daniela Levine Cava, and Eileen Higgins of the city, that I can say, "This is what happens when Democrats get elected. These are the good things that are happening in these communities because Democrats have been elected." And so it's a little bit of both. And I know that the activist part of our party apparatus wants us to do a little bit more of the first part, the going after Trump and going after the administration. But as a party apparatus, that's really, I see more on the latter side, that we got to talk policy. We got to show people that we're hearing them and that
Yeah.
we got solutions for them.
Yeah, most people that I talk to like the hell with Trump. Trump's going to do what Trump's going to do, but in the end, how are you helping me and my family and my community? Like,
That's right.
how do how do I put more food on the table? How do I have gas to go to work and back? Those are the most important things to people. And I think, yeah, we can still have fun by going after Trump, but I think we have to stay focused on, in the end of the day, it's about the people, and they wanna know that we're fighting for them, and that's the most important thing that we can do.
Yeah, but we also can call it out too and show the
Yeah,
and show the corruption. I mean, a lot of my talking points that I use is the extreme corruption, even here in the state of Florida, that we've spent $608 million to build Alligator Alcatraz. That was based on an emergency order that the governor had signed years ago, and that they had a slush fund. And at the same breath, they're cutting $120 million worth of HIV/AIDS medication for people here in our state. And so showing the complete like chaos and corruption of that front, it is okay to highlight the corruption aspect and make the connection for people. You know what you could have done with $608 million in the state budget? You could have built X amount of more affordable homes. You could have made sure that there was better infrastructure, that your community isn't going to flood the next time the rainstorm comes in Broward County. Instead, you built a detention center in the middle of the Everglades, which has horrible conditions, the stories that were coming out of it. So it's okay to go after them and try to make that connection, but you can't stay there. You have to
yeah,
talk about what you're going to do for the
yeah.
people.
Well, Nikki, we have a tradition on at our table. I don't know if you know about it, but it's a special award. It's called the Sit Your Ass Down Award, SYAD. So, and our guest on at our table all get the honor of bestowing this prestigious award to someone or to some concept or to some policy or whatever. So, Madam Chair Nikki Freed from the great state of Florida, who do you present your Sit Your Ass Down award to this week?
Wait, that's a great question, and I love that. So I'm assuming I'm about somebody that I think that needs to just be quiet.
Yeah, they sit down,
And
go to a corner, get themselves together, right?
that would be our unelected appointed attorney general here in the state of Florida, James Uthmeyer. And why I say all that is because he is using and abusing the powers inside the Attorney General's office. And remember that the lineage of this office now. It
Yep.
was Pam
Yep.
Bondi,
Pam
then
Bondi. Yeah.
Ashley Moody, and then Ashley Moody, who's now U.S. Senator Ashley Moody, and that's how James got into this position. And James has been all over the place, making life difficult for literally city and county governments and elected officials. On MLK Day this year, he just came out and said, I'm not going to enforce in all 60 of these different laws that have to deal with like equality, all unconstitutional, just kind of declared it. When we were dealing with a case law, a trial, and a ruling coming out of the Panhandle on open carry. He refused to continue to back up the laws that are actually on the books, and so now Florida is deemed an open carry state. I have my own disputes with him at this moment. He's taken a job at the University of Florida, getting $100,000 salary on the side. In the same exact moment that he was announcing that he is starting a new task force to go after legislators who put money into the budget because he thinks that maybe they were doing it for their own personal or professional career advancements. At the same time, basically was saying that it's okay for me to take $100,000 salary from the University of Florida because I need more money. So he's somebody who should be on people's minds of he needs to sit down
So
and be
give his
quiet.
name again, so everybody
J-
understand.
Yep, James Uffmeyer. He is the unelected appointed attorney general in the state of Florida, and he is up for actual election this November. So we need all your help. This is somebody who understands the powers of the attorney general, and unfortunately are using it to abuse the people of our state.
So General Uppmeyer, sit your ass down.
That's right.
Last question for you, Nikki, because I have to bring this up. There are recent reports that came out about some young GOP group chat that was filled with racist comments, and allegedly it involved folks from the Miami-Dade GOP and student leaders from the college Republicans and what is a Turning Point chapter at FIU. When incidents like this come to light, do you see it as fringe behavior, or is it as something of a broader political culture that has been tolerated, particularly in the Florida Republican Party?
Yeah, it's not alleged. These people were in this chat. So and it's so bad. It was that Jamie, they renamed the chat Nazi Heaven. And over 200 plus times in the chat, not only just the N word usage, but killing babies and seniors and violence associated with it, and tremendous amount of anti-Semitism all spewed throughout the chat. Don't have relations with Jews because you may have and use some very very derogatory words to describe the Jewish community. And I think that, unfortunately, this is what we're seeing as the future of the Republican Party. We saw that, last year with that Young Republicans national chat, which was just on fire. But I think here in Florida, this is a policy decision coming from, and I'm going to even go back to Jeb. And what's happened in our education system here in our state. And it is the getting to the voucher system and universal vouchers and schools of choice and charter schools. And look, I'm a product of the public education system. I'm a proud product of the education, a public education system. But and I understand where some of those schools of choice and homeschooling and voucher programs is necessary for the betterment of our children. But the end result of such extreme policies is the fact that we have resegregated our schools. That if you are living in a community and you're used to going to public schools and you're exposed to people's backgrounds and cultures and having to interact with classmates that aren't similar to you, whether it's economic, geographical, or demographics. And so what's happened is that people have been able to use these financial resources and pull people out of traditional public schools. And so now you're not hearing, the stories of your classmates or, and being able to be exposed to those cultures. And certainly we are seeing a lot of fraud happening where there's money getting taken out of the system. I mean, Erica Donalds, who is Byron Donalds, who's running for governor here, exposed that she was running a charter school that took 1.4, $1.5 million. and then the school never opened. And then it puts
Wow.
additional drain back onto the public schools that have to now absorb those kids and figure out teachers. And but what's happened is that even in those charter schools, and even as we're hearing parents pooling their voucher dollars together for homeschooling, and they're creating their own curriculum, which means you're not getting Black history, which means you're not hearing about the Holocaust, which means you're not hearing the stories of the LGBTQ plus community. You're not hearing the real story of America and Native Americans. And so you're losing a lot of the fabric of our country and what has built our country and the historical proponents of it. And now you're getting people that are just very culturally insensitive. And then you have leaders like Ron DeSantis, who, Florida is where woke went to die, and demonizing all of those groups. And so is it given almost permission, since you don't have any other experiences, it's giving you permission to be as diabolical. And so I think that that they're rotten to the core, and it is not good. And we even have another gubernatorial candidate here who is not going to qualify for the ballot. Hasn't lived here for 7 years, but he has spent his time. He's kind of taking the Charlie Kirk route, and he is spewing a lot of. He's going onto college campuses. He's going into different locations and spewing a lot of racism and anti-Semitism, and he's getting support from the 18 to 29-year-old range. He's actually beating Byron, who is the Trump endorsed candidate in that demographic group. That is really just really disheartening of the future of the Republican Party. And if they don't fix this now and try to get into this, is who is going to be their leaders. It's going to be who runs for office. So either we all kind of as a society and as Americans, and certainly the onus is going to be on the Republicans to fix this. I can't even imagine if this is coming from one of our chats that we would
Yeah.
just put out a statement and walk away. Like,
No.
we would understand that there is a problem that we have to fix.
Yeah. Well, it's a very sobering thing. It's very scary, and and those of us who have kids that are young, and we see this culture that is developing now. And it just makes me think back that we can't go back. We can't go in reverse. We as a nation need to move forward, and that means then we have to press our leaders to set a great example. And it's sad to say that we got leaders like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis that aren't.
Yep. I mean,
And
Jamie, I can't tell you how many times when I was commissioner, I can't even believe that had to do this. I had to stand and do press conference after press conference after press conference begging DeSantis to denounce neo-Nazis that were walking around in downtown, Tampa, to Jacksonville, to Orlando, that are holding Nazi flags and DeSantis flags. And his rhetoric is like, oh, that's just, it's just a political ploy. And obviously these people aren't serious. But if you don't say something and don't educate that, even that, maybe it's a prank, maybe whatever it is, but if you don't get in front of it and show that this is unacceptable, even at its most, and I mean, I don't use the word innocent, but that's not even like the right word, in the very basic way, and you have leaders that are just not doing it. And that's where they feel like they've gotten permission to go to these extreme levels.
And folks, this is bottom line why
Yeah.
it is important that we compete everywhere. This is why we need Florida to come back to be the Florida Democratic Party, to be as strong as it possibly can, to put up the best candidates, to run those candidates, to win with those candidates. And that's why if you can, please support Nikki in her effort to take Florida back, to rebuild this party, because she needs your support. And Nikki, where can people go if they want to learn more about what you're doing with the Florida Democratic Party and to support your efforts?
Easy. First of all, on every social media outlet, we actually have done some analysis that our interaction on our social media platform is actually top over the rest of my state party chairs. So we'll take that a little bit as a badge. So we're all over social media, but obviously floridadems.org is our main website. You can go on there. There's ways to find out how to run for office, check your voter registration status, financially give some dollars, and get signed up for our weekly newsletters, weekly talking points. We really are building a party that people will be proud of, that will be sustainable for not just the blue wave of 26, but for the future elections here in our state. So floridadems.org gives you all the great information about how to get involved and how to make sure that you're part of this pendulum program that is going to change the pendulum. As I always say, Jamie, is a pendulum moves in two directions. It takes a force of energy to move it, and so the Democratic Party in Florida is going to be that force of energy.
Well, folks, I can tell you as someone who knows every state party chair, Nikki Fried is one of the very best, and I am so proud to consider her a friend, and I'm gonna do my part to help her, to take Florida back, and I hope you will also help in that effort as well. And Madam Chair, thank you so much for being at our table on Substack Live. We so have enjoyed the conversation, and I can't wait to come back down there to knock on some doors and go to some rallies with you.
You will always be welcomed here, and everybody loved every time that you came here. It really is a sense of morale boost when you were here in our state, making people feel that we haven't been forgotten. So, thank you for all of your support over the years. It is a partnership, and we can't do it alone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you all for watching our Substack Live. We're going to be doing these much more often. I think the team wants me to do them every week. So we're going to do a lot. And so it was great to have my dear friend Nikki Fried on. And we will see you next week.